If we want to be an effective leader, team member, and problem solver, we must be skilled at understanding what is really going on with ourselves and others. My guest, entrepreneur and author Michael Ventura, spent years refining an approach to help leaders and teams develop valuable perspectives that can be applied to solve problems internally and for their customers. Michael calls this approach applied empathy and even authored a book with that title. This approach focuses on getting to know others and their challenges by actively engaging with them and applying what we learn to developing more effective and satisfying solutions. In this conversation, Michael and I discuss his journey in founding his award-winning strategy and design firm, Rosa, how he developed the applied empathy approach, why and how he started a traditional medicine practice based on traditions of qigong and Nahua shamanic practices from Mexico, how his consulting work and traditional medicine work are connected, reflections on how to foster deeper connections with others, and the life lessons from his dog, and how that led him to join the founding team at Kismet, a dog food company founded by celebrity couple John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. Let's dive in. Michael, welcome to Making Business Hard. Thank you so much for making time to be on the show today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, Michael, I have curious about many things about you since you have your hand in many different buckets. And I'm very curious to explore just a few of them because we don't have the time to go into everything. But something I noticed in doing background research for this conversation is that at a young age, you shared with your parents that you wanted to be an idea man. And I'm curious, do you recall an idea that really excited you while you were growing up?
So, I think the thing I always liked growing up was various different like friend groups, and I hesitate to use the phrase shape shifting because that would seem almost like disingenuous. What it actually was, I loved to be able to sit at the table in the lunchroom with the people who loved music and sit and talk about music for a day, and then the next day to sit down and talk with the honor roll kids, and then the next day sit down and talk with the athletes, and the next day sit down and that was probably like one of my favorite parts of growing up was that I enjoyed all of those groups. I had something I could contribute, whether I was like good at this particular sport of the season or AP biology, it didn't matter. Like it was just like I enjoyed sitting in those different tables and getting to know everyone. And so I think when I think about like being an idea person, it really for me was enjoying learning about other people.
I don't think that has changed, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Is there something from back then that has carried through like today? Some curiosity or something kind of a little more specific?
I would say, I always had an interest in creative pursuits
Mm.
and making things that were beautiful or interesting for people. And so I'm not like a graphic artist, but as someone who grew up as a creative director in the early part of my career, what I learned at a pretty early stage in that process was I know what good looks like and I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and then like getting the right people around the table to make that thing happen, whether it's a photographer or a director or an art director or a designer or a musician or whatever,
Mhm.
and being that sort of conductor of an experience or an output was something I did all throughout high school too, just in a different form. It was designing a good experience for a gathering or figuring out a better way to do our school yearbook or things like that. Like I was involved in making stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah. The word that's bubbling up for me as I hear you say this is taste. What do you think helped to shape your taste?
I think I have a strong opinion. Taste is highly subjective. I think
Yeah.
really what I have is a strong opinion of what I'm looking for. I have a good, like, a mind's eye, and and often see what I am trying to get to. And
Mhm.
that might be a very tangible physical output, but that also sometimes is a place in my life. And so I think that I'm a good visualizer, and that tends to
Mhm.
drive my taste.
Interesting. Any influences in terms of taste? Somebody whose taste you looked up to growing up or in your younger years?
It's funny. It's a funny question that's been asked before. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have like a this person is like
Mm-hmm.
the mixed bag of things. I would
Mm-hmm.
say like
Mm-hmm.
I love indigenous and Far Eastern
Mm-hmm.
traditions of art and making and pottery and all sort of things like that. But really love modern art for what it has sort of contributed to my aesthetic and like ways I think about conceptual art. But then I was a magazine kid. I grew up with like a stack of magazines in my room all the time. And when I was a kid, maybe those were like Mad Magazine and comic books and things like that. And then as I got older, there was that boom time in like the .com boom where there were these magazines that like all emerged almost simultaneously, like Wired, and there was one called Red Herring, and there were all these like .com books, and I remember that was like in magazines, and that was a big time in sort of like devouring that content. So yeah, I mean, I kind of draw from everywhere. I also really like looking at the work people make that is intangible or sort of harder to touch and feel. So like I think about musicians, I think about poets, I think about people who make art in that way, and that's very inspirational to me too.
Mm. Well, this podcast is about business, and so I'm curious to hear your answer to the present day. So tell me about where do you work and what did you get paid to do? And feel free to interpret and express your answer in any way that you feel
Sure.
appropriate.
So I work from this room that we're talking in quite a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
live out at the east end of Long Island. It's a quiet little peaceful place. And what I spend most of my days doing is writing and doing thought leadership work and speaking
Mm-hmm.
about the topics of empathy, leadership, and purpose. And that is an evolution of a 20 plus year journey as an entrepreneur, building businesses and arriving at this point. But it is something that really fills my cup these days. I very much enjoy doing it.
Mm, nice. Well, I'd like to kind of start our journey today by revisiting the founding of your agency, Sub Rosa, in 2009. So tell me about what was Sub Rosa at its founding and why did you start it?
Mm-hmm. Well, to answer that, I almost would rewind even a little bit more. So I started the
Mm-hmm.
first version of Sub Rosa in
Mm-hmm.
2004, which was
Mm-hmm.
called Seed. And Seed was a digital agency that grew into a full service creative marketing shop. And then the financial crisis of '08 hit, and we had maybe 50 employees around that time. Myself and a couple business partners, had a sit down and talked about, do we still want to weather this storm? This is a hard time. Clients' budgets are non existent. We've got 50 mouths to feed. What's going on? And we all amicably decided on different things. And some of those partners left to go start something new. Some of those partners left and took jobs. I decided to stay. But in order to stay, I had to really tear Seed down to its roots, no pun intended, and think about how to rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming out of the '08 crisis and birthing Sub Rosa from it, one of the things that I did was I went to a lot of our big clients at the time. And at the
Mm-hmm.
time, that the three that I had the heart to heart with were General Electric, Nike, and Target. And I said to all of them, what are you not getting that you need? Because you're in a difficult situation now too. Where are your pain points?
Mm-hmm.
And they all, in some way, shape, or form, kind of said the same thing, which was we have a lot of consultants that we pay a lot of money to get very expensive decks from. And
Mm-hmm.
then we take those decks and we internalize them and we sell them in and we secure a budget for them. And then we go out and we brief agencies like you and others. And then those agencies will adopt the strategy that was written and execute something against that. And if it goes well, we all live to fight another day. But it's a very inefficient process.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had creative partners who could move upstream and do some of the strategic work that we hire
Mm-hmm.
consultancies for, it would solve a lot of our problems. It would be more efficient. There wouldn't be this messy baton pass that sometimes
Mm-hmm.
happens between the work. And consultants are never going to go downstream and build an executional arm because that's, beneath a lot of the sort of starched collar consultants that they were
Mm-hmm.
working with. But the likelihood that an agency could grow up and into that was higher. And so all three of them agreed to give me a pilot project. And I said, look, like, let me try. And if I
Mhm.
fail, I'm not going to ask you to give me another one. But if I get it right, I solve your problem and I solve my problem. And so Sub Rosa was really a brand strategy and design firm that always held on to about 30% of our revenue being tied to the making and the doing and the building and the implementing.
Mm.
But for the most part, 70% of our business was upstream strategic work and work around organizational design, brand positioning, communications, corporate social responsibility, internal culture. And that work was really exciting and fun. And
Mm.
we got to stick around and do the doing on our own recommendations so we could see it come to life.
Nice. Well, that's very rewarding because something I experience is we do a course or a workshop or any series of things that are more upstream, but then you don't know what happens down the road. Or you check in with a
That's right.
client and then they're like reorged like three times, and then it just kind of hurts your heart that your good work, not just your good work, but the work that emerged out of the very rich interactions with the client, it just kind of dissolves into the
Yeah.
ether. I'm like, oh, that must be a really good feeling to see it come to pass. So, but over the years, and you already tagged a bunch of obviously needs that your clients had, but once Sub Rosa was more mature and you had some distance and pattern recognition, what were some of the most common challenges clients brought to you? And not so much like, hey, we're hiring you for a campaign, but like the kind of the
Yeah.
juicy bits of the real problem.
Yeah, and truthfully, we never made ads. It was always problem solving that we did.
Yeah.
That was what people came to us for. And I would say
Mm-hmm.
one of the most common ones was our internal culture doesn't match our external brand.
Mm. Okay.
We tell the world we're innovative, but in truth, we're pretty bad at innovating.
Mm.
Or we tell the world we are the best at this, but if you saw how we make this, you would see so much inefficiency and so much
Mm.
complexity that we just can't get over. And so it was a lot of kind of the discord between what's happening internally and what's happening externally. And then I would say there was sort of another pattern that would come up a lot, which was a company in crisis or in transition. So crisis being pretty self-explanatory, like there could be a recall, there could be a, like, I remember we were not like at the front of the table for this crisis, but we had a seat at the table during the Fukushima meltdown with GE.
Mm.
And
Mm.
like what's happening with that, and how does the brand have to show up in this moment also, and wild, but that was
Mm.
primarily led by crisis PR, but we were
Mm.
around, which was interesting to have to see that unfold. But transformation, or like the change side of it, might just be like new CEO, new objectives. And
Mm.
now all of a sudden, like this stuff we've been working on for 6 years is getting backburnered, and we've got these new things, and
Yeah.
there's chop in the water, and people are resigning, and what's happened? Like, how do we like stop the bleeding a little bit and get things back on track?
Well, I imagine like many myself and many other people who consult, you have the experience of a client either comes to you and says, "We have this problem, but that's not really the problem," or the other another version that we might encounter is something hurts, but I'm not sure what it is. Was there any particular ways you developed to help clients kind of see and define their challenges more clearly?
Yeah. So we learned throughout the process of building Sub Rosa that when we got out of our building, when we got out of our offices, when we got out of our blind spots and biases, our work was always made better. But that's
Mm.
harder, right?
Yeah.
It takes more time, it takes more effort. You can't necessarily just charge more for it. So you've got to just do it and let the work speak for itself.
Mm.
And along the way of doing that, we developed a process that became known as applied empathy,
Mm.
which was designed to methodologically help us do that uniformly, right? Like, what are
Mm.
the steps you take? How do you get out of yourself? How do you become aware of your biases in the first place? And who are the people we need to talk to? And what are the questions we want to ask? And all of that sort of stuff. And so, because not everyone walks in the door at Sub Rosa with a uniform empathic skill set, having a method that people could rely on and a set of processes that they could go to their toolbox to grab helped us skill up with some parity across the whole organization, and made our work better because we all had a common lexicon and a common way of working that we could share.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you about applied empathy in a moment. But before that, I'm just curious if there's a project that stands in your time at Rosa. Is there a project that stands out for you as an experience that changed you or shaped you in some way?
Yeah, I would say the most formative project
Mm-hmm.
was the work we did with GE. This is like turning into a GE podcast, which I don't intend, but it's funny. They were a beautiful
Yeah.
client for many
Mm-hmm.
years with us. We did a lot of great
Mm-hmm.
work, so it's no surprise to me that they
Mm-hmm.
come up as much as they do. But we were asked to help redesign GE's mammography experience and help them grow market
Oh.
share, but
Mm-hmm.
also understand the patient journey more fully. And without getting into the whole long version of that story, what I'll say is everything that we presupposed was the tip of the iceberg. And there was such a bigger thing under the surface that we unearthed as we went through that process. And it was really, I have always said that is sort of the origin story project for realizing that applied empathy worked.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it in practice in such a meaningful way. And just to cut to the outcome, we were able to move their market share from second or third in the category. I think Philips and Siemens, I think they were third. Philips and Siemens, when we started the work, were both selling more machines and service contracts. But we got them to a first place in the market. And more importantly, along the journey, unearthed a way to, without changing GE's core product, design a experience for patients that was not only more comfortable and increased the schedule making, which is important in getting breast cancer screenings because you want to make sure you're getting one every year, but it increased the efficacy of the test without changing the machine because of certain choices we made about room temperature and comfort and the process that actually it yielded better results. And that was an astounding finding.
It's amazing. Well, how about yourself? What was the internal impact to your skills, to your spirit? How were
Well,
you
put a lot of
different?
wind. Yeah, put a lot of wind in my sail because
Nice.
I saw that it worked.
Mm.
And this thing that we had been talking about internally and saying like, this is how we're training our people and this is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't like had a project that called for it so perfectly up until that point. And then when we did and we used it and we stuck to it and we did it the way we were built to do it and we got the outcomes we got, it lit us up and we knew this was the business to be in.
Yeah. Was there ever like some client or patient feedback that really landed on you in a powerful way?
Yeah, I remember there was this one woman. She came in to a live workshop that was
Mm-hmm.
happening because we built this research space at retail level in a shopping area in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone could come in and get a free coffee. And we had people trained to just sit down and like have a chat with you about women's health. And when's the last time you had a mammo? And what do you like and
Mm-hmm.
not like about it? And it was a way better way of doing it than like behind a piece of one-way glass in some
Yeah.
like drop ceiling conference center. And so we were conducting a roundtable discussion, and this woman just happened to walk in and get a cup of coffee. And she like walked over and she was listening to what people were saying. And there was a wall of Post-it notes because they had just gone through an exercise of asking people like, what's the part you hate the most about getting
Mm-hmm.
a mammo?
Mm-hmm.
And the woman walked over to the wall and she just put her finger on one of the Post-it notes and welled up with tears. And she said, this one is mine also. And it said, waiting for the phone call.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it opened up a whole conversation about fear and trepidation and anxiety and what if and all of the stuff that sits under the procedure that
Mm-hmm.
a machine maker may not think about when they're making a machine and a hospital ops person may not think about when they're designing an efficient throughput for patients. But that's the whole point. Like, how quickly can we get this woman her results and tell her what's happening? And can she feel comfortable going into this appointment knowing that it's going to be as quick and efficient as possible because we know you're scared and we want to get you the right information as fast as possible, right? So like all of those things were really meaningful.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes those emotional undertones aspects to an experience or to getting something done might not be embraced by some people in a team, or some roles in a team, like say in my experience, kind of finance, might not really think about that very much or care about it for that matter. Or there's they show me the ROI question, which is very limiting. It's very limited type of thinking, especially when you're doing something new.
But if I can just jump in on that,
yeah.
I'll say, I love talking to what I affectionately refer to as like the tooth sucker in the room. It's the person who's like, yeah, this doesn't sound like this is really worth our spend.
Okay.
And because you can have an ROI on this work, but you have to put it in different terms, right? It's not just uncovering that insight, but product market fit is predicated on having deep empathy for your customer. And high performing teams emerge when you know each other's skill sets and know how to rely on each other better. And organizations become more responsive and resilient when they're looking outside of their four walls and understand where culture is going, where their customer mindset is shifting. And so you can't, sure, you could like put a cap on someone's head and like track their brain activity, and like that's not what we're talking about when we say measure empathy, right? What we're talking about is how do you actually go out into the world and measure the net effect of practicing this on your business.
Yeah. Well, I think too, there's other forms of value other than only the dollar that some people get very stuck on. So there's like reputational value, there's relevance in the culture, like you were just pointing out, longevity in the market, and any other number of things that we could sit here and like unpack if we thought about it for like 5 minutes. So I'm always interested how learning from other people's kung fu as to like how do you deal with those naysayers and kind of invite them and have an effective way to help them shift perspective. And it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to agree, but at least they understand they can look at something with a couple of other different lenses, and at least be like, okay, I see where you're coming from, even if they don't agree, right? So
absolutely. And it's also, I think one of the things that I have loved about this kind of work is some of the biggest dissenters have become some of the biggest advocates once they see what actually happens. There's this old adage, a CEO and a CFO are having a conversation and they're talking about a training program that the CEO wants to do for his team. And the CFO, she says to him, look, I don't want to spend all this money on all these trainings. What if we do all of that and these people leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay? Right?
Yeah.
And like, that's the conundrum that we're in with this work.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you able to bring some of those senior leaders into contact with the end consumer or the person having that emotional experience, like say with this story with that lady?
Yes.
Was there a senior person in the room in that moment by chance?
Yeah, not only was there a senior person there then, they were a integrated part of the team from the beginning. And actually the two women who were the integrated part of the team, I remain very close with to this day, because that was such a deep bonding experience we were going through together. And one of them also was a breast cancer survivor. And so her participation was so doubly meaningful because of that. It just, it was so powerful.
Yeah. Once I was in a room as a representative of the qualitative research team. I was in a room that was local government looking at public transportation, like mass transit. And it was like data this, big data, sentiment analysis from social media and so forth. But it was like a fairly like intellectualized conversation. And then when it came our turn, we shared some stories. So we shared the story of this lady. In this instance, there were like no bus shelters at the bus stops. And this immigrant lady who makes her living cleaning houses, she was at a bus stop and it started raining. And so she didn't have shelter. So she jumps under a tree to shelter herself from rain. But then it turns out that she had landed on a nest of fire ants and they crawled up her legs and bit her. Yeah, exactly. For the listeners, Michael just kind of had this like facial reaction.
My jaw dropped. Yeah.
And the people were just kind of stunned. And then the conversation just shifted to talking about people and humans. And it was just such a good feeling like, oh, okay, we have landed on reality instead of abstraction. The abstraction is useful, but the reality is people's lived experiences. So that was like a little instance that was very rewarding to see just the conversation shift, because
Yeah.
a senior person, at least they had some proximity to somebody lived experiences. But if you can take them out, like on safari per se, I think that can be so much more powerful. So I love
Yeah.
that story.
And that metaphor is one I often use. Do the work like a safari, not like visiting a zoo.
Yeah,
Like,
I've used that metaphor myself for sure.
yeah.
So we've been dancing around this applied empathy, and so I just want to acknowledge that you published a book called Applied Empathy in 2018. And listeners, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that you check it out if you haven't listened to it or read the book already. But I'm curious to dig deeper into the roots of this book. So do you remember when in your life did you notice empathy as something you were very intentional about?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the first anecdote we shared. I didn't know to call that empathy then, but the lunch tables, it really was. It was the willingness to be able to pop into other worlds and be curious and ask good questions and see what life is like for that person that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always been curious. And I think that's been a big part of what's gotten me in trouble, but also gotten me in good trouble also, and
Mm-hmm.
helped me to grow and evolve as a practitioner in this kind of work. And so how it came to be at Sub Rosa was really just, I think founder-led businesses often have a lot of similar DNA to the founder. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
high-strung, aggressive person, it's likely that the culture there is going to be
Mm-hmm.
high-strung and aggressive. And in the case of my business, in the beginning, I don't think I knew enough about myself to know what I wanted it to be, but there were clues, there were little sort of like flashes of it. And then as I got more mature as a leader and realized that this was a way to not just like have the business reflect a personality trait of my own, but actually reflect something that I deeply care about and think is the right way to do this work and to focus. And I'll also just add one more thing about that. Deciding what you want your culture to be is a bit like making a magnet, in that it's going to attract the right people, but it's equally going to repel the wrong ones.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be something for everyone.
Yeah.
And so picking an org culture and designing a business around it and like really kind of committing will lead to attrition in the beginning. People will leave
Mm-hmm.
if they don't ascribe to it, if they don't feel this is right for them. And that's great. That means you're being specific,
Mm-hmm. Right.
because otherwise what happens is people try to be something to everyone and there's actually nothing there and it's very thin and it's just like some word you use in italics on the second page of your capabilities deck, and that's like the extent of it. But like if you
Mm-hmm.
really double down, the people who need to be there will be there and the ones that don't will also go their
Yeah.
separate ways.
By chance, this curiosity is so I'm super curious, which is in this podcast is an expression of that because then I get to ask people a ton of questions. And then I went on to study cultural anthropology because no surprise. I'm just super curious about people. But from what I'm hearing about your youth, I'm just curious, were you by chance the friend that people came to because they wanted to just tell you things, like you were the people's therapist in a way of just like listening and kind of sharing and understanding and sharing perspective?
Yeah, at times. I was
Mm-hmm.
also, yes, that's a part of it. But I think
Mm-hmm.
the other part was I was very, like, physically, I was a large person, right? Like, I'm 6'4". I was
Mm-hmm.
probably 6 feet tall by the time I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no time in your life where you want to be less visible than like peak puberty. And so to be the big person
Mm-hmm.
going through all the awkward stuff that everyone's going through, whether it's like a acne breakout or just like your gangly arms and legs and uncoordinated and like kind of like
Mm-hmm.
everything all out of proportion at that time. Like when you go back that far, I also remember trying to be very small and trying to not be seen too much because
Mm-hmm.
I was so on display in some ways. I was like literally like a full head taller than most of my
Yeah.
classmates. And so as like my proportions fell into shape somewhat
Mm-hmm.
and like and became a little less uncoordinated, I think that corresponded to me being more willing to be seen and connected and
Yeah.
connect with others. But yeah, like there was this period where, I was a very introverted kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to have a job as a public speaker as
Mm-hmm.
someone who's like ultimately wired
Yeah.
more introvertedly than extrovertedly. I mean, I'm probably like an ambivert technically, but like it's been an interesting part of my own journey to like
Yeah.
embrace being interested instead of interesting, and
Mm.
to know that is a way of being in the world. You don't
Yeah.
just have to be like the most interesting person in the world. Be the most interested. That's more interesting.
Well, back in that really awkward time, do you remember anyone being very empathic towards you, or just being like a champion, or just somebody like very kind that helped to shape you?
Adults, I would say, like not my peers. I don't
Yeah.
remember a peer,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely remember like some teachers who like got it
Mm.
and were like, "It's okay, kid. Like life's
Yeah.
gonna be fine. Don't worry." Or coaches and my parents. My parents were
Mm-hmm.
very cool. They and still are, and like really understood us. And my grandfather had this really funny conversation with my mother, which I didn't know, but like years later, she told me she was talking to him one day and just saying like, "I just don't know. Like he's so different than the other kids." And my grandfather said, "Don't worry about him. He's going to be just fine." And it was like this like
Mm.
note of encouragement my mom needed in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But he saw something too. He always knew who I was from a very young age and like really supported it.
Yeah. You saw that the force was strong with this one.
We shared a birthday too, which was always very
Oh,
special.
that's great. So coming back to Sub Rosa, and you already touched on this a little bit earlier, do you have a recollection of when you started to like wield empathy like very intentionally at the agency, like a project or a client or a time in the
Yeah, I
agency
mean,
or
I would
something?
say the G one is probably like not to repeat it, but that is the
Mm-hmm.
one that like that was the moment, and then from then it went into everything, right? Like then we had like the best case study imaginable, like so that was the moment. And what was interesting is right around that time we also realized that our best work was more than likely going to be internal work, not external work, and we did great
Mm.
brand work, like really strong. But we always said, kind of some to repeat myself again, like if it's not true internally, no one's ever going to believe it externally, right? And that discord between what you want to be and what you're perceived as, and getting that right was really the crux of it.
Yeah, for sure. We'll revisit that in a little while, just foreshadowing. But so let's just define some terms because we've been speaking about applied empathy. But like, how do you define applied empathy, and like, what are the key ingredients to actually make it effective, to make it work?
Mm-hmm. So I define it as self-aware perspective taking to gain richer and deeper understanding. And self-aware is a phrase you don't often hear when we talk about empathy, because we think about empathy for others.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know who you are and you don't know your
Mm-hmm.
blind spots and your biases and the way that your vision colors the world you see and your history has informed the choices you make and the ways you act, it's really hard to understand that for someone else. So doing that self work is valuable in becoming a more empathic leader. And with respect to understanding, which is a word that gets used with empathy a lot, I like to say it's about accurate understanding, and accurate understanding can only be had through dialogue. I can't look
Mm-hmm.
at you, stranger, from across the room and say, "This is what this person's all about." I have to get to know you, right? And in the same vein, there's all this talk about seeing the world from someone else's perspective, standing in their shoes. And while I like those definitions for their like colloquial adoption, the thing about them that's challenging is it's not entirely right, because Michael standing in John's shoes is not the same as John standing in John's shoes. And what I might want in those circumstances may be different than what he wants in those circumstances. And so I could put myself in the same context, but that doesn't mean I want the same things. And so the way to get accurate understanding is to say, I don't know that answer, which is the hardest thing for humans to do.
Yeah. Did
And
you
to
ever?
go ahead.
No. Did you ever get the like? Well, just send them a survey, or let's do a 1 hour focus group.
Yeah.
What
Um,
was your response to that?
I mean, sure, you'll and
Mm-hmm.
like and we'll scratch the surface,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the same. And that's like deciding to switch from Coca-Cola to Diet Coke and think that you're gonna, you know, change your life, right? It's you'll some of the effects will still remain, right? And so I think it's a diet version of doing deeper work.
Yeah, there's I have a friend who works at an organization that pretty much relies on surveys, and they struggle to connect with audiences, and they pay tens of thousands of dollars for these surveys every year, and it's like, oh, Hispanic male with a family of 2.7
Right,
kids, whatever that means, and
right.
this that characteristic, and there's just no, it's just particular how the leadership just kind of feels really comfortable in that pocket of staying in that approach, and yet feels
Yeah,
the pain of what's
it not
happening
being
with the
enough.
audiences and not being able to make sense of that in a more effective way.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some challenges there. So I'm also very curious, like who would hire you for empathy work, and what were they trying to achieve? And when I say who, is was there a business unit that was common, or a role
Mhm.
within the business unit, or a type of personality? So I'll let you interpret who the who is that would hire you, and what were they trying to achieve generally.
Yeah. Rarely would someone hire us for empathy. What we would be hired for was a problem they need to solve. The way we solved that problem
Right.
was made different than the competitive set that we were competing against via our process. So, and some clients didn't care. Some clients were like, don't need to see how the sausage is made. Just like, get me the answer. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fine too. Like, you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to like join the cult, right? Like, we're going to do it either way. But if you want to come along for the ride, we'd love to have you. But if not, like, we'll go do this work and then come back around. So clients would range from a handful of different folks at the C level. Sometimes it was the CEO who really knew from the top down, like, we need to be doing something different and we need help. Sometimes it was the chief marketing officer or chief brand officer, because that's pretty self explanatory and you could imagine
Mm-hmm.
why they would want this.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the calls we got from chief people officers or heads of
Mm-hmm.
HR, because those briefs were always really interesting
Yeah.
and fun and complicated, and would lead to so much more other work. Like, the marketing work tended to be, and it was great. I loved the marketing stuff too, but it tended to have a shorter shelf life because it was tied to a moment in time. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
we'd like to bring you in to do something really great for this new product launch we're developing. Or,
Mm-hmm.
and so you'd build all this great work and it would yield a good outcome. And then you'd wait until the next time they needed some help and they'd call again. But with people ops stuff, the work never stops because the people don't go away. They work there every day and the
Yeah.
challenges persist. And maybe this was the challenge du jour, and now 7 months later, it's a different one. And that's fine too. And we'll keep rolling with it and evolving this culture. So that was fun in the sense that we really got a chance to go for longer stints with clients through a journey.
In terms of pattern recognition in your work, what was a common pattern of something that came up in clients' team that kind of got in the way of doing the work of solving these challenges or applying empathy?
I guess one of the things that was most persistent is, in almost every company, the middle tier of leadership. So middle managers, but like folks who have headcount and real responsibilities, and it's the worst job because they have all of the responsibility, but like none of the glory. They have to manage up, down, and laterally differently. And if they do everything right, no one says anything. And if they do one thing wrong, everyone notices, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like the plight of that is very noticeable in almost every organization. And so people would often say like, oh, we need to do this from the top down, and we need to model this behavior from the C level down, and or we need to start at the roots and like start with our entry employees and really train them the right way from the get go. And the right answer is both and middle out. The middle out was actually always the best way to do it,
Mm-hmm.
because those you get those people on board, which is the hardest because they have no time because they're doing so many other things. But if you get those people on board, it moves up and it moves down and it's modeled across the organization the fastest. It's the hardest to do, but it is the best outcome. And so I think as pattern recognition, to answer your question, long way of answering your question, people often thought that the distribution strategy for a new culture or a new idea or a new behavior or a new way of being or a new brand had to be one directional, and it's multi-directional.
Well, thank you for that answer. Just super random thought because my ADHD brain goes there. You just made me think of the show Silicon Valley. Did you ever watch that? Because it was all about being alone.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
It was a fantastic answer. It's so true. Other than GE, was there a time that a client had like a breakthrough with applied empathy that you saw some shift?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be grandiose, but a client that you really felt good about them, like, oh, wow, they grew in some noticeable way, at least to you.
Yeah. There was a very large, very reputable blue chip investment bank that really needed to diversify its employee population. And they had done a decent job, perhaps better than their competitors, in what I'll refer to as sort of the diversity that is visible. So they had recruited people of different ethnic backgrounds. They had, for a very male-dominated industry, a better ratio of women in leadership positions than others. But what they didn't realize was they were, by and large, a lot of the same people in different wrapping paper. They all went to the same 5 schools. They all read the same news sources. They all had similar ways of arriving there. And so there was no cognitive diversity. And there was no way of building a more well-rounded and robust culture when everyone kind of thinks the same way. And so getting them on board with this idea in the way we were building recruitment and retention strategies and building culture in this organization meant you can't fish in the same ponds for talent. And as investment banks become more and more reliant on technology, not just AI, but technology writ large, to inform their businesses, why aren't you recruiting at engineering schools? Why aren't you recruiting people out of Google? And so having those conversations was a huge light bulb moment for a lot of them, who then realized, oh yeah, we should be doing that. Let's go explore that side of it. And it has made for a much better culture there.
Yeah, for sure. Something I was really surprised by was when I learned, and this is many years ago, that Intel had an anthropologist who would just kind of stay in touch of how people experience solving their problems and their needs and how their lives were changing, and kind of take that back. And that was just so counterintuitive because it's a chip company, but at least they had the wisdom to apply those lenses as well to their thinking. So yeah, it's amazing. Thank you. So part of the spirit of this podcast is to connect the dots between seemingly unlikely aspects of our lives. And something I'm curious about is connecting the dots between your work with applied empathy at Rosa and your traditional healing practice, Corvus Medicine. So tell me about the evolution of Corvus. How did it start and where is it now?
It started with a very broken boy named Michael Ventura, who was an early founder who had a lot of stress and very poor coping mechanisms. And so I would come into the office and I would look around. I'm probably 26 years old at the time. This is still seed. And I wouldn't see 40, 50 people. I would see 40, 50 rents that need to be paid this month, and 40 or 50 grocery bills and school tuitions. And that was a very extreme amount of pressure I put on myself, because I felt like if I screw up, I'm going to screw up these people's lives. And so the way I dealt with that was I'd work 12-hour days, and when I was done with the day, I would leave and I would numb myself with whatever I could get my hands on, whether it was alcohol or something else, to just kind of be disassociated for a little while until the alarm went off and I would get up and go do it again, because otherwise I wouldn't sleep at night. And that led to a lot of wear and tear on my emotional self and my physical self. And one day I was changing the water cooler And I just like remember like a flash of like white, and I open my eyes and I'm laying on the ground, and the water jug's like pouring on me, and people are running over in the office like, "Are you okay? What happened?" And I had herniated 3 discs in my back,
Mm.
and I could barely walk. And went to the hospital, and they were like, "We need to do spinal fusion, and like you're gonna have arthritic pain, but like this is it. I mean, you have bone on bone. You don't even have discs in these between these vertebrae anymore. We're gonna need to do surgery." And I said, "All right, I'll think about it." And I left that day. We weren't going to do surgery like on the spot anyway. And I talked to a friend who said, "Have you ever tried acupuncture?" And I was like, "No." And this was at a time when like that side of medicine was certainly not as ubiquitous as it is now. It was around, but it
Mm.
wasn't like as commonplace as I think it has gotten in the last 20 something years. And so I was like, "No, but I'd love to try. I'd like to try anything before having to have spinal fusion." And so went, and my back got a little better, like 1%
Mm.
after the first session, but I could feel like there was a crack in the door. There was like something happening. So
Mm.
I came back, and then came back, and then came back. And then on like the fourth or fifth visit, the TCM Chinese medicine doctor said, "I don't think you have a back problem. I think you have a stress problem. And until you deal with the stress, the back stuff's never going away. But if you deal with the stress and you manage it differently, I don't think you'll have to have surgery. Have you ever meditated?" I was like, "I've tried. I just can't sit still enough." He goes, "Well, do Tai Chi. It's moving meditation. Keep doing this. Let me give you some herbs to help you with your stress so that you're not just like running out of the office and numbing yourself." Like, and so that sent me on a path of really doubling down on Chinese medicine specifically
Mm.
at that time. And within 6 months, I had no back pain, and I never had the surgery. And I learned a way of being that was different, and it was very helpful. And then the floodgates opened, because I was like, "What else is there? If this is here, like what are the other things?" And I went on the spiritual buffet line, and
Mm.
I tried everything. I sat with shamans, and I had Rolfing sessions, and I like, you name it, I was interested. And I found that to be a fascinating exploration. But at a certain point, I
Mm.
realized you have to, like, you can't eat from a buffet every day. Like, you're going to
Mm.
have an upset stomach at some point, right? You have
Mm.
to pick a type of food and just eat that every once in a while. And so I committed to two traditions that really helped me to just work on myself. One was traditional Chinese medicine, and the other was indigenous practice from the Nahua, who are a Mesoamerican female folk medicine tradition.
Mm.
That I had gotten a treatment from this woman, Mileova, and she really showed me how her tradition works through working on me. And after working with her for a little while, and after working with my Chinese medicine, my Taoist teacher, and then the Chinese medicine doctor, I went back to all of them after a couple of years of just like being in it with them, and said, "I really would like to try to help other people
Mm.
who may be going through similar things.
Wow.
And I'd like it if you could teach me." And in their own way, they all kind of laughed at me,
Mm.
and they said, "What do you think we've been doing for 2 years?" They were like, "There's no practitioner who practitions if they haven't been able to help themselves.
Mm.
This is the first step." And like the light bulb went off at that point. I was like, "Oh, wow, so cool. I never thought about it that way." And then the real training began. And I started working with both of my two teachers to learn the way they do their work. And
Mm.
ultimately, they both very much encouraged me. Sorry, it's a long answer, but it's a journey to find my way of expressing it, because I'm not a Mesoamerican Nahua, and I am not a Taoist master.
Mm.
But those traditions were taught to me as if they welcomed me into a lineage that was not my genetic lineage,
Mm.
and made me feel at home in it, and
Right.
said, "This is yours now too. Use it your way. Don't
Right.
interpret it, and make it make sense for you." And that was how this all began.
Well, we've talked about doing our own inner work, so that's very clear. But also, I'm curious, as a practitioner, what would you say is one of the most important factors in helping people heal? And that question really comes from a place where I believe we heal ourselves, but
Yeah.
there's the healers kind of as a facilitator of that. So on either end of that equation, what would you say? Give me a couple of brushstrokes. Like, what are some really important factors in people really helping them heal and get well?
Yeah. So I don't use the word healer because I think
Mm-hmm.
exactly as you just said, that the person
Mm-hmm.
who's seeking help is the one who's going to do the healing.
Yeah.
The practitioner's job is to create the circumstances where the innate healing potential inside you is realized.
Mm-hmm.
And that setup is the name of the game. And one of the most important first steps in that process is understanding root causes, right? When I went to the hospital with the herniated disc, they said, you don't have discs. We need to do fusion. We're going to treat the ailment. And I have no problem with Western medicine. It is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic and people
Yeah.
need it. But that was a symptomatic solution. It wasn't a root cause solution. And then when I went to the acupuncturist, he said, I don't think you have a back problem. I think you have a stress problem. And that was a root cause diagnosis. And it led to a very different outcome for me. So we have to understand root causes. And as practitioners, good question asking and patience are
Mm-hmm.
probably two of the most important things, because someone may not have the answer on the first session as to what the root cause is. I treated a handful of people yesterday, and one of them, when he walked in,
Mm-hmm.
told me what he was there for. And when he was leaving after 90 minutes or so, I said, do you still think that's why you came? And he said, absolutely not. It was because of this. And then he told me a
Mm-hmm.
whole other thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, I needed to be quiet enough with myself to really realize that today. And so, yeah, I mean, let's just create the circumstances.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we share a passion here because I mentioned earlier that I studied cultural anthropology and I got through that through a very keen interest in ethnobotany, and I got through that through a very keen interest of like myth, folklore, but also folk healing. And I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
Ecuador, so that's, the curanderos, that's just
Yeah.
part of it. It's just in the culture, right? The cure with the eggs and,
Yep.
the herbs and everything else. And I even did my undergraduate thesis with an ethnography of Mexican folk medicine in Southwest Florida.
Oh,
And
amazing.
and I'll tell you, I'll tell you the Twitter-sized version of the story that really was mind-blowing for me. I interviewed one of the people I interviewed is this lady who was like a community leader type lady in the Tampa area. And she had a terrible car accident where the car flipped over multiple times, ended up in the hospital with like a body cast for months. And the most terrible thing, though, is that every time she would close her eyes, she had flashbacks to the accident, which meant that she couldn't sleep because every
Yeah.
time she closed her eyes, she had this experience. And she was in her house like for months, and she went through the entire Western pharmacopoeia of Prozac and Valium and everything you could throw at this PTSD, essentially. And once she was recovered and she was able to leave her house and her bones healed and so forth, she ran into a good friend. So obviously these are all people of some Mexican heritage, right?
Sure.
She ran into a good friend of hers and she's like, hey, what happened? And she's like, well, this happened and I'm experiencing this. And then her friend also happened to be a curandera. So a healer, curandera is Spanish for a female healer in these traditions. And so her friend says, come spend the weekend at my house. I'll fix you up. So she goes spend the weekend at her friend's house, and they do all these rituals of these different jumping over fire, like herbs
Yeah.
and smoke and a bunch of other things. And then by Monday, she was cured. She was able to sleep, and she was done with the PTSD. And we can unpack that in all kinds of ways and directions and really explore that very deeply. But yeah, I think it's very powerful to work with the psyche and beliefs and setting up that container for people to heal, which you were just
Mm-hmm.
sharing. Anyway, so when I read in your book about Corvus, I was just very excited because I just really felt a lot of kindred interest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems
Yeah.
like it. Yeah. And it's
Mm-hmm.
also, for me, hearing that story that you just shared, it's a perfect example of why folk traditions are so special. Because if you went to a village 2 hours from where that took place, they might do it a completely different way,
Right.
right? And it is jazz, not orchestra. And the local nuances of all of it is so unique and special. And it's why it resonated for that woman too, I'm sure,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it was home in a way.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely a key in per my observations. But so you've shared about this healing practice, and so now let's connect some dots here. Did you apply anything from your healing practice back to your client work at Rosa or even now?
It's the same job. It's the exact same job. It's just different
Mm-hmm.
tools.
Yeah.
It's one of them, I joke, is a little more candles and sandals than the other. But at the
Uh-huh.
end of the day, like, it is understanding root causes, creating the circumstances where change can occur, offering support in order to move someone through the process and make sure they feel set up for success when they walk out.
Yeah.
It's the same job.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this in some ways, but let's just articulate it. Let's talk about purpose. And I understand you're writing a book about purpose. And so what inspired you to focus on this topic at this time?
After Sub Rosa was acquired, I had a few years that I had to stay on. And then after that was done,
Mm-hmm.
I looked around at my life and I didn't really know who I was when I wasn't Michael from Sub Rosa, quote unquote, right? Like this, like,
Mm-hmm.
professional. I knew who I was as a person, but my professional story, I was like, well, now what? And it
Mm-hmm.
was a very disorienting time. And it was also peak COVID. So we're talking like end of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to figure out a way to like get clear on what to do. And when I was going through the earnout and like ending my time with Sub Rosa, I had always had this little text pad file in my phone that was titled Next. And I would just put, anytime I had like an idea, like, I'd like to go back and get a new degree. I'd like to work on this other book idea. I'd like to fill in the blank, whatever it was. This entrepreneurial dalliance here, or this crazy idea there. Just put them in there, so I didn't lose track of them. And then one day I was looking at all of them and I was like, well, what do you choose? And how do I choose? And this would be very unscientific of me to just like pick the one that sounds the best and go do that. And while I am also a little more intuitive than analytical, I was like, I need a process. And so I made a process, and I don't know how that process came to be. It kind of just spilled out of me
Mm-hmm.
in the span of about a 10-hour day,
Oh.
sitting at my coffee table at my home
Mm-hmm.
with post-it notes and pens and markers and tape. And I just laid this thing out and went through it for myself. And in the end, I felt like there was some real clarity and a sense of like what I wanted to pursue. And I just put it on the shelf and I was like, okay, now I know what I'm going to go do. And a month later, I was talking to a friend and they said, I'm having this problem, kind of stuck, not really sure what to do next with my career, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, look, I just did this thing and it worked for me. Like, would you want to like go through it? I can like walk you through the steps. And they were like, yeah, I'd love that. And so I did, and they got a good outcome. And then a week later, I bumped into someone else and they were saying the same thing, and I gave it to them and they got a good outcome. And so then like, I was like, oh shit, there's something to this. And
Mm-hmm.
like, maybe this is actually more than something that was made for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to my agent and I told her, I think there's another book here.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked her through it and she read my outline and she said, this is the book you're here to write. She's like, I know it in my bones. She's like, let's get this thing out in the world. So
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm in the process of doing it now. It'll come out at some point next year. And I think it will be helpful for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And what's the Twitter-sized summary of your approach to this process?
Yeah, it's not a find your purpose book, right? There's plenty of those, and I don't think there's any more that really needs to be said about that. This is a what do you do once you sort of know what you're here to do book. This is how do you say no to shiny objects? How do you hold yourself accountable?
Mm-hmm.
How do you measure progress and growth? How do you make the most of the short little flash of time you get on this rock?
Yeah.
And how do you do it with some fun?
Mm-hmm.
And like actually like go through a process that's enjoyable and self-exploratory and uncover some stuff about yourself and see it with fresh eyes. And the way it's designed, it is designed to literally do all of that. And I think that's why it works, because it's not linear. It's very staccato, but it's a process.
Yeah.
And then it kind of culminates, right? So there's like, you do this and you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to do it. And then you're going to do this. And I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to do it. And by the third or the fourth one, like you start to see the corners of the puzzle become very clear. And then all the pieces kind of click.
Yeah. So give me a teaser here. So if there's a listener that maybe they're scratching their heads like you were some time back, what would be just one, like the first step, like one thing that they can do to kind of start to get their orientation in the right direction?
Hmm. What did you do when you were a child that when you did it, time stopped and you just did it because you loved doing it and you'd look up and it was 5 hours later? What was
Yeah.
that? There's a clue in there. That may not be what you need to do now,
Hmm.
but like there's a clue in there for sure.
I love that question. I've been exploring that for a few months, coincidentally. So that it's so good. I remembered a time very clearly. I was meditating one time, and it just this flash came to me at a time when I was 4 years old, and it's kind of this like unconditioned just joy and curiosity, and just making things with my hands. And it was, oh, I'd like to clean up some conditioning and express that again with that clarity, right? Have that clear energy. So I love that advice. That's great. Now, taking another look at your life here, I know that like me, you did not grow up with dogs, but became a dog parent as an adult. So tell me about your dog Daryl and his influence on your life.
So Daryl was my first dog, a spiritual being in a dog suit, and was just so kind and gentle and funny and really like showed me sides of animals that I didn't really have an appreciation for until
Yeah.
I lived with him. And he was a dog that people would stop on the street just to talk to, and they were like, "Who is this dog? Like what?
Mm-hmm.
Like he had a vibe, right? He had a real vibe." And we lost Daryl last year, which was
Mm.
very hard,
Yeah.
but he had a very good life, and he taught us so much, and we are grateful for every moment we've had with him. But along the way, I think what he also showed me was like the joy of just going a little slower
Mm.
and savoring the moment.
Yeah.
And he when he started getting sick, he had a first round of cancer when he was 7. He lived to be almost 11.
Mm-hmm.
But we got a second dog because I thought about how special he was and how integrated into our life he was. And I thought about it sort of like the way you think about making sourdough with like a starter. And I was like, I always want to have a dog that
Yeah.
knew a dog that knew a dog that knew a dog that knew Daryl. Like I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
break that starter.
Yeah.
And so Mary, who's our dog at the moment, she's her own dog in many ways. But there are moments, there are flashes of Daryl that we see, and we're like,
Mm-hmm.
that's cool to see that carry on.
Can you tell the Tibetan monk story?
We were walking down the street one day, and in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
you find these monks walking around sometimes when they're visiting the UN or when they're doing a rotation at a monastery or something upstate. And we're walking down the street one day, and this monk kind of like smiles, and we slow down to say hello. And he kneels down and he looks at Daryl, and he holds his little jowls in his hand, and he looks at him, and he stands back up, and he goes, "It's nice to see my old friend has come back as a dog," and then just walked away. And I was like, yeah, obviously he's a monk in there.
I love that story. That's awesome. Michael, so now you're channeling your newfound love for dogs through a dog food company. So I'd like to hear about the company and what's most exciting about your role there.
Yeah, so post Sub Rosa, after going through the prioritizing of purpose and all of this stuff, I decided, okay, thought leadership, all the things we talked about at the very top of this call were going to be where I was going to spend my time, and remains to be. And then I get a call from my friend Assad, who I've been friends with for many years, and he says, "Hey, can we take a walk? I just want to pick your brain about something." So we go for a walk, and he says, "Early in my career, I was an analyst at BCG, speaking as Assad, and my best friend at the time was this guy John Stevens, and John and I were still best friends, and our careers took very different trajectories. I left management consulting and went into finance, and John Stevens became John Legend." And he said John's career really took off shortly after realizing he didn't want to be a management consultant. And him and his wife, Chrissy, and Assad and his wife have all remained the best of friends. And they were together talking about how Chrissy and John had never really done a business on their own together. They've done businesses on their own, but never did a collaborative business. And they said to us, "What's better than anybody? And the markets really well. What's the most like authentic business we could build as a couple that's true to who we are, but that's also like a smart business decision?" And he said, let me think about it a little. And then he came back and he said, I mean, you guys have had dogs in your life since the very beginning of your relationship. And like, you love dogs. I think it's a great idea. Let's build something in that category. And so they got super excited about it. And soon after they realized, all right, we got to build a team. And one of the main roles of the business is to have someone who leads the brand and really understands the customer and the mindset. And so I said, look, I know you're doing this other stuff, and I'm okay with you continuing the arc of your career in the direction you're going, but would you also think about building this thing with us? And I was super excited. So I said yes. And we launched, here we are, July 16th. We launched on May 1st. So it's still very early days. It is a business that I would not be in if it wasn't for Daryl, because I would have had such little of understanding or appreciation for life with dogs had it not been for him. And just functionally, it is the highest quality, best tasting, shelf stable food for dogs, right? And we're doing testing, and like it's beating the farmer's dog and like these other brands that are fresh food, because we really have invested in like making food we want to feed our dogs. And we figured out a way to make recipes that are super nutritious and tasty, and it's been fun. It's like I've never been on the client side before, so we have agency partners, and I'm now their client. I like to think I'm a pretty decent one, because I have been through this on the other side long enough to know that how to treat people, how to brief them, how to give feedback, all of that stuff. So yeah, it's been a fun ride. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Any particular highlight recently, like any instance, conversation, something happened that just kind of popped energetically for you, kind of brought a smile to your face, or gave you
Well, I
some
think
joy?
when you do something with celebrities, there's an immediate sort of like, oh, another celebrity brand, big eye roll. And it's very different working with them, because they are very real, accessible, kind people. And they are in this business. I mean, we talk daily, and they are excited about it. And you know, we've been given the benefit of their celebrity to bring a new brand into the world with a lot of fanfare. We were in the first days of launching on Jimmy Fallon and the Today Show, and Drew Barrymore and Fast Company wrote an article about it, and like all of that stuff. And a food for dogs doesn't tend to get any of those opportunities, but a food for dogs built by two mega celebrities who are authentically in this space and have some meaningful things to say has really helped. So that's been cool. And then the other thing that I think is worth mentioning, I was very adamant about ensuring that we had a smart and thoughtful corporate social responsibility strategy. And everyone agreed, but it was sort of my job to figure out what that should be and who it should be with. And I found this amazing human named Dr. Quan Stewart. And Quan won the CNN Hero of the Year award last year for his work, which is that he goes to communities where there are unhoused people who have dogs, and those dogs are not getting the medical care they need. And he's known as the street vet. And he walks around and he treats the dogs of the unhoused, and he makes sure that if they have worms, they take the pill and they get rid of the worms, and if they have an infection, he gives them a shot, and he makes sure the wound is clean. And so we've been supporting Quan's work, and he's our chief vet. But then also we've just started opening what we're calling pet pantries. So much like there are food pantries for people who need a little help and can't necessarily afford a bag of groceries this week, same is true for those dogs. And so we just opened one last week in Long Beach, California. There's already one open on Skid Row in LA, and stacked with our food. And we hope the dogs that need it get it.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. A concept that I started to really form and land on around 2006 or 7 is that all business is show business. And I'm curious, John, I don't know his wife, I'm not very familiar with his
Chrissy,
wife as much, Chrissy. Him being a musician in an art form that really touches and moves people emotionally, and also just in concerts, you learn or absorb at some level, set design and how to make it exciting or elicit something in people. Has that percolated into the work in some way in terms of either just vibe or technique or some perspective or a lens as to connect with people?
Yeah, I think most pet brands, and if you're listening to this and you have a dog, ask yourself this question. Like, what do you feed your dog? A lot of people don't even know that answer. They just say, oh, it's the green bag. right? Or like,
Mm.
I know what it looks like when I see it, but like, so a lot of people don't even know the answer to that when we've spoken to folks. And the ones that do, I ask the follow-up question, why? And because my dog seems to like it, does well on it, sure. How'd you find it? It's what the breeder sent us home with. It's what our
Mm.
vet recommended.
Mm.
It's what my friend feeds their dog. There's a handful of answers, but what's underneath all of that is most of what pet brands talk about today are the ingredients. Ours is the freshest. Ours is the best. Ours is
Mm.
dogs are wolves and they need to eat high protein diets, and ours
Mm.
has the most protein, whatever it is. It's an ingredient story.
Mm.
We've made sure we cover our bases on that, but ours is a brand story. And that's the
Mm.
showmanship. That's the John and Chrissy
Yeah.
aspects of it too. Like, this is about life with dogs. And like, we have a very serious content side to our business. Like, we
Mm.
make interesting content about people's lives with dogs because that doesn't make us any revenue, but it makes us a brand and it
Yeah.
helps us have a point of view and a story and something that feels more than just duking it out on banner ads about whether our
Yeah.
food has more beta carotene than yours. Like, who cares? I mean, like, obviously it's important, but it's like, if that's all we ever talked about, how often would we actually talk? But if I talk about
Mm.
how fun dogs are and how interesting they are and how noble they are, and like, here's a story about this family who's got a dog that does this weird thing, and like, dogs light you up if you play in that space, but most of the food brands don't go that far.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's many brands that don't do a great job at being a brand. So I intended to get into brand work and it just didn't work out in terms of opportunity and so forth. I'm an observer and a student, and I just love when people approach it in the way that you're doing. I interviewed this lady, Cheryl Farr, in a past episode who just really gets the building the spirit of the brand in that way. So I love your answer. So we're starting to wind down our time together, our conversation today, and something I like to ask guests is that the name of this project is Making Business Art. What comes up for you when you hear that phrase? What meaning do you make of that?
For me, when I think about all the businesses I do, they are a reflection of my life and my
Mm-hmm.
interests and my passions, which is my art
Mm-hmm.
in a way. And I'm not a painter. I'm not a photographer. I love words. So writing is an art form for me. It's also a way I make money, right? And so I think if we live in a way where our passions and our creativity can be channeled effectively, it is easier to see that make be made manifest through a commercial aim. It doesn't mean every passion you should try to make money on, right? Like this, there is this sort of like trap that
Mm-hmm.
we've seen in the last decade or so, where like every passion needs to become a side hustle and an
Right.
LLC that you're trying to make a little money on. And that's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But make your work your art.
I love that. I also want to acknowledge that, well, I think part of making a business art is connecting with people. And I think art elicits something from us emotionally, right? Or elicits something in us, I should say, emotionally in some way. And I also know that you're a bridge builder and connector. So, just curious to hear from you. What are two or three better practices to foster connection among people?
Take more time. Don't rush
Mm-hmm.
through a conversation
Yeah.
or hustle through like the moment. The moment is where the magic is, right? If it takes an extra 10 minutes, great. You're gonna find something special in those 10 minutes. Be aware of the little wiggle that comes up from the base of your spine when you're having a conversation with someone that encourages you to insert yourself into the conversation and tell them about a time that happened for you, or like when you said that, it reminds me of this, and now I'll tell you an anecdote that takes 5 minutes, and then we'll go back and forth. Notice it, and then say, instead of that, is there a follow-up question I can ask them about what they're telling me? Is there an opportunity to go a click deeper on that versus playing tennis
Mm-hmm.
of stories? Because that's where like real interesting stuff starts to open up.
Yeah.
And the last one I'll say is, like, be willing to be a little more vulnerable than you are. because if you go a click deeper and people see you're willing to do that, they will also reciprocate. They'll go a click deeper. And it doesn't mean every conversation has to go to the depths of the ocean, but you're going to learn a little more about yourself every time you do that. And hopefully some other people do too.
That's great. Well, Michael, I think we're reaching the end of our conversation. I have a lightning round, and then we'll open up the floor for you to share what you have going on. So for our lightning round, I have here 4 or 5 questions. And the first one is, what was the last piece of media that you loved? And that can be a book, movie, podcast, or anything else.
Oh man, I had like 3 different ideas that all flew into my head at the same time. I was going to say Dune 2 because I just finally saw it, which is late for me because I was really excited to see it. But that was really enjoyable just as an aesthetic journey. But, I have this very dear friend. I know this is a lightning round. I'm taking too long. Very dear friend who's a music collector. And I saw him last week and he dropped about like 7 new records on me that I'm really enjoying right now. So I think those are the 2.
Great. Any one of those records that is really popping for you right now?
So, there's a couple. I'll tell you the name of an artist because I think it's a better rabbit hole for someone to go down. So the artist is Don Laka, Laka, and the song that I really liked was called Stages, but there's a whole collection of his work that people will enjoy.
Cool.
I hope.
Next question is, what is something that inspires you?
My wife.
Oh, that's beautiful. Say more.
She's like a natural artist and creator, and like everything she does is elegant and perfect, and she doesn't know either of those things. So it's like so charming to watch her not see how great everything she makes is, because if she did, she'd be an egotistical maniac, and instead she's this humble genius, and it's really cool to hang out with her.
Oh, man,
She's my best friend.
That sounds wonderful. What is a song or band that you must play during a road trip?
Oh, that's a good question. What's funny, on a road trip, one of the things I find myself listening to a lot is a band called Tinaroen. They're from Mali, and sort of this like mix of like psychedelic rock and like desert music. And it's just like, it's a great driving kind of music.
Okay. And last question, what do you want to see more of in the world?
Compassion. And I didn't say empathy for a reason. Compassion is a side effect of empathy. And so it presupposes we'll be practicing empathy, and then hopefully we can be a little more compassionate. The world is on fire. It's so scary and terrifying. And I'm not just talking about the US, I'm talking globally. And I'm talking not just in the headlines that we read that are at the top of the fold. I'm talking about what's happening in indigenous communities. I'm talking about what's happening in West Africa. I'm talking about what's happening with the Uyghurs. Like, there's a lot more happening in the world than the top 5 headlines, and it's all not so great. And it's going to take everyone moving in a new direction to get us to a better place, and I hope we do.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, in closing, Michael, can you tell us what do you have going on? Why should people reach out to you, and where they can find you?
Sure. So first and foremost, if you have a dog, feed them Kismet. You can use MV15 at kismetpets.com. And genuinely, we really do believe it's the best food you could feed your dog. On the new book side, best way to sort of stay abreast of what's going on in my life is via my Substack. So michaelventura.substack.com. I don't write there as often as I should, but when I do, I provide updates as well. So that's a good place. And I think most relevant to this type of listener is I love to just share this work. I genuinely love giving a talk or running a workshop or doing an offsite with a team. And so if this sounds like the kind of topics that would be helpful, reach out. michaelventura.co is my website, and contact information's all there, or just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm actually pretty responsive there. And those are ways to find me. And I hope we do find each other.
Excellent. Well, Michael, I'm so grateful that you have shared your valuable time with me today. Thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and maybe we'll do another round later on when the other book comes out, and we'll unpack that in greater detail.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I would love that. Take care.